starting the recording. We have Cord Tst. We have June 5th. We've got two main topics. One is more status in the 6.0 release. I would like to postpone that towards the second half of the call so we can, I think the discussion of SEBA is going to be relatively self-contained. So I wanted to start with that, and it somewhat reverses the order we had last week where we spent a lot of time on the status. And that might let a few more people get on the call as well. So just to remind everybody of the big picture, with the new strategic plan of the ONF, we are bringing reference design and their exemplar platforms to the forefront. Of the reference designs, SEBA, Software-Enabled Broadband Access, is one of the highest priorities. A lot of resources are going into it, and the reason is that there will be trial deployments. The operator partners involved are AT&T, Turk Telecom, DT, and Google. But of those, it does seem to be the case that AT&T is very, very seriously trying to reach some milestones on a trial, and so they're bringing a lot of resources to it, and there are a lot of ONF resources here. So it's just for context, it's becoming a very high priority for everybody. SEBA can be viewed as a specific use case of Cord. That's a perspective. That doesn't mean anything other than we are hoping that effort that goes into SEBA, which is a high priority, also translates more broadly into Cord, which is a value in a multi-access case. That's just a little background information. What I wanted to do was run through a short document, and if you look in the chat window, you will see a link to a Google folder where we've started to collect a number of SEBA-related documents, including this one. So this is I want to have just a few slides to set some context. This is related to the Cord controller. It's related to VOLFA. It's related to ACORD because FCAPS is one of the key problem areas, and that's about collecting events and data. And so there's an ACORD angle of this as well. But again, this is a subset of the problem, the broader problem of SEBA. Just to remind everyone of that larger architecture, this is the slide that Saurav showed last week. And yes, there's a very critical core of it that's VOLFA related. That's a huge part of it. There's ONS running on that with some apps, including the VOLT app. And then there is a network edge mediator at the top of that, which if this were a Cord diagram, that would be called the Cord controller, but it's essentially the place that brings together all of the subsystems underneath. And by the way, optionally, there can be BNP, could be a workload option as well. So that could be configured into the very same pod. But the big thing to notice here is that the network edge mediator has a lot of responsibility for aggregating all of the FCAPs, addressing in a uniform way all the FCAP requirements. And so the context here is narrowly the network edge mediator and FCAPs. And then from that, of course, it touches everything else in the system, including VOLFA. Let me stop for just a second and make sure everyone's on board with the general context here. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to. I want to get those, everyone have the right perspective before we dive down just a little bit. Okay, let me soldier on then. So one of the first things that we did was start to ask the question, where are we current? So by another name, SEBA looks a lot like and will leverage a lot of the work that's already been done for Cord. So if you sort of take the work that we already have accomplished, the combination of Cord Lite, VOLFA, and take that as a starting point for the implementation of SEBA, then an obvious place to start is just to take stock of where we are and understand where the gaps are. And again, this is specifically starting out, this isn't the whole problem, but specifically starting out in the context of FCAPS. And so a real quick summary is that for a lot of this, there's a lot of pieces in place, but they need to be coordinated and reconciled, and I use the word normalized here. In terms of faults, we have a number of elements in place already. Elk stack is an example, but we need to make sure we've normalized across all sources of diagnostic information. Config, which I am broadening a little to include inventory. Again, there's a lot of foundation in place. We have a data model. We need to just make sure it's complete, do an audit of what we have and make sure it's complete. At least we have a reasonable starting point. Accounting, there isn't technically a billing aspect to this, but there is billing-like information, which would correspond to per subscriber usage statistics. And so I think we can treat accounting for the time being as a subset of performance. Again, performance, there are a lot of fragments in place, but we need to normalize across all the sources. And security, the foundation is in place. We have access control, we have multi-tenancy. Again, we need to audit and complete. So my high-level summary is that we've got a good start on config and security. So we've got the mechanisms in place. We need to just flesh out the details. And with faults and performance, we've got lots of fragments in place, and we need to figure out how to normalize those. And that's, again, a kind of just a rough characterization of where we are. So focused on faults and performance, again, there's multiple sources of data available. There are syslog messages that are being collected using Elk stack, and there's actually extra functionality in there because that's correlated with the data model, which helps with diagnostics. The expectation is that Volt is going to post events and counters to a Kafka message bus. That has always been part of that architecture. And at least some of that is in place now because we're using it to complete the ONU activation workflow. ONAS exports an API to retrieve performance data. Kubernetes exports an API to retrieve performance data. And Redfish API has been proposed as a means to retrieve statistics from devices and servers. And you'll have seen Redfish on that earlier diagram as well. So the challenge isn't, we still need to make sure that those sources are complete, but the challenge isn't the source of data, it's consolidating that data together in some way. And so while I think everybody recognizes that there's value in consolidating into a common framework, we should try to do that, it's with one note of caution, which is we tried to do that before with Cord, and the problem of one size fits all becomes problematic. And we found ourselves in a situation where the barrier to entry was too high to collect the very first bit of monitoring data. There was too much work that had to happen. So we want to keep that barrier as low as possible. So that kind of colors the strategy that is outlined on the next slide. So that strategy, I think, is consistent with what has been going on with Cord. And whether you call it monitoring as a service or telemetry-as-a-service, the strategy is basically as follows. We're going to register available data sources with the NEM, and we're going to call them collectors. So don't get too hung up on the term. That's the abstraction of anything that's delivering data into the telemetry, anything that's delivering telemetry data. We don't care how it's implemented. It may have internally doubled as a controller. This is the case with ONAS. All we know is it has data available that can be used for, to address different FCAPS requirements. And so having registered this having registered a particular source of data, you remember the source on the previous slide, we can enforce access control and we can provide an optional control interface, for example, to reset counters and to set alarm thresholds as examples. So having allowed for arbitrarily many collectors, we acknowledge that there's, it would be good if we could get behind a small set of collectors or even possibly one collector's framework as well. And so we're going to we're going to simultaneously pursue a normalized collector that leverages Kafka. And so what that means is that we're going to have to define a common event schema. We're going to have to write producers as necessary. So that could be the case that something like Volta is already producing events. But in a case of a REST API like Redfish or ONOS offers, we may have to write, either we go into ONOS and change it and it's also producing events, or we have to pull the REST APIs and import data into the data bus periodically. We need to make available a publish event library, client-side library, so the Volta team can populate the different elements of Volta with the ability to publish events to the bus. And then as necessary, we'll need to write transformers to export the data for consumption. And I call out VES as an example of a format that we may want to produce on output. It happens to be a format I believe that ONAP is expecting. So Kafka does support buffering, but it's not arbitrarily long archiving. So we are likely also to need some sort of time series database that we can archive data in. And I kind of think of that as simultaneously a consumer of the data bus, and it could be viewed as yet another collector. Collectors can layer on top of each other. So you could view Kafka as one collector, and you could have some time series database consume that data and provide perhaps a different interface, a more query-oriented interface, time series-based interface, and that could be another. It can be registered as another collector, but it's an example of a consumer of the data bus. There's a question as to whether that database lives inside of the NEM or it's in fact global, and we'll have to work that out. I don't have a good obvious answer to that. Maybe the answer is both, and then we will probably build out some other consumers as examples. And again, how exactly you consume this data is deployment specific, but certainly there ought to be a dashboard or a GUI, and there could be other examples as well. So that's the focus on FCAPS and just a real high-level sketch of what needs to happen. There are other tasks, and this is a place to record them and acknowledge them, but we haven't drilled down on these just yet. It seems likely that we're going to need to build a Yang configuration API. The NEM already has an API generation tool, and it used it to generate an API for Tosca. It would seem possible to do something similar for Yang, but we need to explore that. And it could be that it seems to be the case that there are already some Yang models defined that would be brought as input to the system. And so we need to think about a way to import those directly into the NEM instead of depending on the current default, which is protobuf based. Second, we're going to need to complete the lifecycle management story. It's something that's been discussed in the context of Cord. It's a big problem, and we're probably going to scratch the surface on it, but we do believe that there's sort of a coordination between the data model and the container images that get rolled out. So it's a combination of NIM and the internals of NIM and and Kubernetes that will handle lifecycle management. And the final thing, which actually maybe you should have put first because the most of the progress has already happened here, is we need to complete the subscriber ONU provisioning workflow. And the key here is that there are aspects of this workflow that are top-down. The OSS, BSS system or ONAP or somebody that sits on top of SEBA will declare which subscribers are valid, which ONU serial numbers are acceptable, and so on. And so one model is that information gets pushed down, but we want to simultaneously support the discovery of that information in an bottom-up workflow. And the NIM is the place that rendezvous is going to take place. So again, details need to be worked out, but there's actually already a pretty decent example of that in the 6.0 deployment. And so that at least gives us a starting point as how to coordinate the individual subscribers and their ONUs coming up and being authorized by the OSS that sits on top of SEBA. Just a picture of just a kind of a rough sketch of the internals of the NIM, just to kind of track everything that you've just, put everything you've just heard into pictures. There is a certainly there's a set of northbound interfaces. There's a GUI/dashboard. We already have some northbound interfaces. We need to make sure we have the Yang interface as well. There is a place that's keeping track of the authoritative state of the configuration and the inventory. It's also going to be implementing security. So that's a subsystem that would be based on XOS in the initial implementation, and it's got a persistent database. And I'm setting that in, side by side with the other half of the equation, which there's a lot of work still to do, which is the monitoring part of the subsystem, which that's where we're going to, at least as a first start with Kafka as a bus. And so events will be delivered from collectors into Kafka, and the control of those collectors will come down from the authoritative state in the NEM. And again, I just listed some examples of where we might have collectors. So again, Volta already exists, Onos already exists. What we're going to be doing effectively is writing plugins to wrap those subsystems as collectors so that we can bring them in a uniform way into the monitoring system. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there. That's the technical overview of all of this. What you've just seen, I should have prefaced by saying, was a sort of a straw man that we put out and collectively talked with the operators about. So we wanted to make sure that we were headed in approximately the same direction, and that this seemed to be a lot of shared perspective on how to attack this problem. So I thought it was useful the Cord community see this as well. I have one more slide, which is kind of going forward, how we can start organizing work, but I want to save that for a minute and talk about the stuff I just went through. So are there any questions about it? Not hearing any. We got a lot of work in front of us, and we really need to get started on it as soon as we can. We certainly have a Cord release coming up that is dominating a lot of the Cord team's time, especially within ONF. We'll get to that in a minute, but a lot of those people are going to be turning their attention to SEBA going forward. So with that in mind, and I do see Sean on the line here. So Sean, I just wrote the following slide down in actually this morning, as a proposal as to how to start making progress. And so let me just hit this, and then I'm sure there's some discussion points in here. So and now viewing this purely from a Cord perspective, Cord is an ongoing project. We have a TST, we've got releases, and we've got sprints, and we've got all this stuff. The way that I think the Cord effort is going to reshape itself in the near future, and this doesn't mean indefinitely, but at least for the near future, is it's going to focus on two use cases, SEBA and MCord. We could talk all day long about what goes into the next Cord release for 7.0. My proposal is, let's see how much progress we can make on SEBA. Continue to nudge MCord along, probably not as much progress there, but let's make as much progress as we can on MCord. Those are use cases that are going to drive what gets released in 7.0. And so instead of casting the effort, as a Cord release planning, I just propose that we postpone that until closer to release time, which is mid-October, and then take stock of how much progress we've made. And maybe at the very last month, there's a little extra something that gets done here and there to pull it together into release. But let the work on SEBA drive Cord instead of the other way around. The platform call, which happens on Wednesday, and then it's open and anyone's free to join it, that can be a place to discuss platform-wide issues, technical issues that affect both MCord and SEBA. That will continue to happen. We will continue to work through issues with Kubernetes. We'll be worried about getting the data plane in Kubernetes integrated. And there's a whole lot of work still to go on there, but that could happen in that very narrow technical discussion. And of course, at a global level, we're going to continue pursuing multi-access edge cloud as a unifying architecture. That's the point of Cord, is that it can support SEBA and MCord and various combinations of those. And we're not going to drop that ball at all. But that that kind of steers maybe some architectural decisions we make for SEBA, but it's not driving the work in the same way SEBA will. So that's kind of a Cord perspective. The second point is, I think as soon as possible, we should probably convene a weekly SEBA implementation call. And to the degree we can make it work, I think it's joint Volta, Cord, and Cord. I should have said Cord here too. We can always divvy up and go off and divide and conquer in the work we tackle, but if we don't have coordination across these three sets of people now, we're not talking projects, we're talking people, we're going to stay fragmented way too long. And as a proposal, I will just throw out, and again, this is for discussion from this group, but I would suggest that we use Tuesday 10 a.m. Pacific time as the time for that meeting, if it works for people. And that is the Cord TST call time, but what I would propose is that we hold Cord TST calls as necessary in some other way. I just think that what happens in Cord is going to be so dominated by what happens in SEBA that we should just focus our attention there. Issues come up, we can certainly address them, but from a timing point of view, this makes sense to me. Again, we can discuss. And the third point is we probably just go off and create a SEBA project board in JIRA and start adding stories to it. I'm not saying that to preclude other work under the Cord or Volta projects. Each of those projects will make their own determination as to what is joint in SEBA and what's so specific to Volta or so specific to Cord that it doesn't make sense to put it in the shared space. But that is, again, my proposal on a way the way that we organize ourselves. So that's all I have in terms of presentation. Are there any questions about what this is all about or ideas about how we should move forward?
Just, I think that I agree with this new way of driving the project, but I think if we agree on this, what Andrea proposed earlier this morning to moving toward a Kanban process instead of Scrum will make a lot of sense, because I can see how this will mean that we'll have a weekly requirement that we need to somewhat chase. And Kanban looks to fit more to this kind of project management than Scrum.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and maybe that would be topic number one to take up in this weekly call. I think it's important that we get a broader attendance at that than the Cord, the people that normally dial into Cord. This really needs to be Cord/Volta/Cord. So with that caveat, I think that would be a great discussion to have.
Yeah, for me it's great, but since I think we have some people from Volta online, so like would be good to hear their opinion too.
Yeah, anyone that's crossing over from Volta would be really good to hear what your thinking is.
Hi, this is Chip Boland from Adtran. I think this is probably a good idea because I see SEBA. I'm starting to join the SEBA and the Cord calls just to make sure we integrate properly. So something focused might be very useful, at least for the initial portion.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's quickly going to turn into a divide and conquer, and that's great. But there have just organically grown up enough independent efforts here that for a little while, trying to bring them all in alignment, I think is a necessary step. And just to be clear, I really want to treat this as a SEBA meeting. It's not Cord is an aspect of it, Volta is an aspect of it, and so on. But I don't want it to be viewed as a Cord call per se. There's a lot of this stretches Cord in brand new directions, and I think Cord will benefit from it immensely. But we really do need to figure out how to drive it from the SEBA, the shared thing going forward. Sean, do you have any thoughts about just general management of the process?
Right now, I don't know yet. I know our Scrum, for the VOTA Scrum is working more than full time right now. So I'm assuming you're talking about the general process is about where the code contribution, and also how do we monitor the progress of the user stories, right? So I think we do need to have a very serious discussion regarding to that.
Yeah, so you make another good point, which is VOLTA is working full steam ahead. The Cord platform team has been working full steam ahead. Suddenly with backlog of stories that goes on forever, and yet somehow we're going to create new capacity on this shared thing. It's going to be quite a feat when we accomplish it.
Right, and the way I because a lot of the FCAP's requirement, which is what name part of the function for the NEM. I think there are a lot of user story has been entered on the VOTA Jira site. So we probably need to go review those as the first step and see what is actually part of the VOTA scope and what is beyond and above the VOTA, and maybe most likely will be sitting into the NEM layer. So I think that kind of review we do need to go over pretty soon.
Yes.
And that I talked to some of the folks who are creating the user story is just go ahead and create it, and then we'll figure out where the boundary will be drawn. So potentially VOTA is going to have more story right now, which may not impacting VOTA directly.
Yeah, that's good. So in that same vein, we can add stories to Cord, where it's sort of the natural home for us. It's a natural home for a team of people. That's the more important thing, that are on the collection side, say, and as long as we can agree to a common format and make available, like I called out, the client side library that VOLTA would use to publish events. Those two things could continue fairly independently.
But is Bill Snow, because it has any suggestion? Because right now the VOTA, we're also in the process of creating the TST board, right? So we have not fully established that. Is that something, and then I'm sure Cord, you have your TST board, and it can get really tricky here. So we need to figure this out.
So that's good. And so having the TST on VOLTA would be great. I think that's an important step forward. One thing that we could do in kind of a stopgap way is just have I don't know what to call it, a joint TST task force or something that just synchronizes. The Cord TST, has people that are interested in things that have nothing to do with SEBA. So I'm not saying this is necessarily every TST member, but maybe we have a subgroup of the Cord TST and a subgroup of the VOLTA TST kind of steer the SEBA joint meetings as best. That might be a way to get going quickly.
And at the same time, you have the A-Core TST, right? Does A-Core has their own TST also?
No, it doesn't. It has more. It's got some active people, but it hasn't matured into, I guess is a way to say it, into its own TST. VOLTA at this point is the most active and mature project that hasn't formed a TST officially. So I think that is a good step to take. Yeah, and some of these are issues we need to kick upstairs to ONF as to how they want to organize things. And I don't have a strong opinion, but my only strong opinion is we need to start moving quickly and not wait around for processes. And
Right.
Establishing a common call. By the way, there's also going to be a SEBA reference design team, and they're already meeting, and that's the heavy hitters from all the operators are basically sitting on that, and that's clearly they're gonna be establishing priorities and setting criteria and requirements and so on. But this is a little bit more focused on the day-to-day activity of the implementation work.
And Larry, I'm somehow also very interested to hear because I'm coming from VOTA side, and then we definitely knows all this new development has a lot of VOTA color in there, right? But what about the original core members? They've been working on the core so much, and then is this sort of like a redirection of the core? I guess what other people has not been involved with the VOTA. What are they thinking about the path forward? I guess maybe that's the core TST you guys need to determine or explore internally, I guess. But I'm just nosy about it.
It's a good question, and I'm not speaking for the entire TST, but I mean, it is the case that there are representatives in the TST, and I'll just use O's as an example, that are focused on Cord, and I'm sure he's concerned that Cord not lose sight of the fact that Cord is an important component of it. Trellis is an important component, and I think what we're recognizing is that SEBA is an important component of it, and so that SEBA has some urgency and immediacy causes us to maybe focus on it a little bit more, but we're hoping that what comes out of this effort is not a separable thing, but is a configuration, a particular subset or configuration of Cord. And that's everything that's done for SEBA will work along side by side with Cord, and therefore multi-access edge cloud, which is Cord's ultimate future, moves forward. We will be in a better place 4 months from now than we are today, because we will have incorporated, based upon some real requirements, mechanisms to address FCAPs and other issues. So it's an opportunity. I think we can manage it in a way that is not that is helpful to the Cord project and not detracting from it.
No, because I think that you already have a lot of Cord related work going on too, right?
That's right.
Ideally, it's the same.
That's right.
Hopefully, the same framework can apply both SEBA and and SEBA can reach out to the Cord side. So,
yeah, my technical objective is that we not fork.
right.
We're going to be adding new machinery, and hopefully Cord can take it, and other configurations can take advantage of it. And so we need to do it conscious of that. But I think that can be handled architecturally without negatively impacting the implementation velocity. I'm hopeful. Yeah, I see some other folks have joined. So for some of you, you've seen this slide deck before. This was an attempt to socialize it with a little bit broader audience. Does anyone else have? We do need to get to the status of 6.0. So the big takeaways here are: let's figure out the processes and the overlap and get SEBA procedurally going forward. There's some more socializing of this idea to do. In particular, I don't think we have quite the coverage of Cord here that we probably need to have. So that we need to make sure that Cord, which brings some resources to the table, is aligned as well.
And one thing for the Cord community is the VOTA has been actively reaching out to other potential service providers and then vendors. So eventually, I think it's a good if we can attract those people to come in. I think that would be a good direction for the Cord community also. So
absolutely. So now asking we'll move on in a second, but just to ask a more narrow question of the Cord-centric community. Is there anything you've heard here that is alarming or takes Cord puts Cord at risk from your point of view, having this emphasis on SEBA? Well, you may be harboring concerns. Feel free to talk to me or other members of the TST offline. And like I said, we're trying to not torpedo Cord. We're trying to enhance Cord at this time.
And you also have the Cord discussed, right? So
what was that?
You also have the mailing list, and people can raise questions or something like that over there too. And
there's a nucleus of engineers that will be well versed in Cord, bringing that that architectural understanding to SEBA. So those people are still talking to each other very regularly.
Yeah.
Hi, Larry. This is Riju. Just have a quick question because I have been working much on the R-Cord profile. Like from what I see, the SEBA is ideally how the R-Cord should be, because R-Cord Lite or the R-Cord with the VSC as of now is definitely a product without the analytics and everything. So this makes the final R-Cord project. So once, I would still feel like it's like rebranded into SEBA, and what does it mean to the future of R-Cord? It just moves to the SEBA, or?
Yeah, so we've actually debated, should we just rename the R-Cord profile? Now I'm literally talking about the profile.
Mm-hmm.
Should we rename it SEBA? And we decided not to take that action right now just because it's disruptive to go change a bunch of code. But I think if everyone had in their mind that R-Cord and SEBA were two different brandings of the same configuration, and it's possible they'll diverge in the future and we'll have multiple flavors, one, for example, with VSG and one without, that could always happen. And having more than one version of an R-Cord-like configuration is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of a branding. And the reference, I don't want to presume that what we implement is the reference design. It will influence the reference design. It will probably be much broader, but that reference design is meaningless if we can't deliver a working exemplar platform, in my view, and that's what we're trying to do. That's our more narrow focus right now.
Okay.
Okay, we will continue to discuss, and at some point we may declare the Tuesday call a SEBA call instead of a Cord call, but everyone will make that clear. Let's spend the last few minutes talking about the 6.0 release. We are waiting on a report from mCord and R-Cord Lite, aka R-Cord, on some last little bit of work getting done to be included. Let me start with mCord because Andy's sitting across from me.
Yeah.
Give me the 1 minute summary.
Yeah. So I think the main milestone for the mCord 6.0 release was the ability to reproduce the MWC demos on top of the 6.0 platform with Helm charts and Kubernetes. We are.
You're cutting.
Sorry?
You're cutting off.
Okay. I can start over. The main milestone for mCord 6.0 was reproducing the MWC demos on top of the 6.0 platform. And so MWC demo includes the physical eNodeB. We're not quite there yet, but we're very close, I think. We can bring up all of the VNFs on OpenStack. Everything looks fine. XOS is able to synchronize them. The last step, I think, is actually hooking in the physically node B, and Ping is working on that right now. We also have Jacob Cooper at Intel who's helping us with that. So I think we will be able to sew that up pretty quickly, and then there'll be some documentation, additional documentation that we need to put together. But I think we are close to getting there for 6.0.
Good. So I'm optimistic about that, and I would really, I'm really hopeful that that is part of the release. We put so much effort into 6.0, not including the ability to run MCord for those people doing it, and encouraging people to move from 5.0 to 6.0 would be a real shame. So the other bit of work is on, there's still a lot of documentation work going on, that's still ongoing, but the other narrow bit of work was an example subscriber provisioning workflow in the Cord side. Jono or Matteo, I know you're working on that.
Yeah, so I guess this is split into kind of two parts. The first was the ONU activation and provisioning, and then the second was the subscriber authentication using some mechanism, either DHCP or 802.1x. And so the first part of it, the ONU activation and provisioning, is already working. Matteo added another feature in the last few days, and so we have a workflow ready for that. The question was, we haven't really started on putting together the subscriber authentication workflow though, and so the question was, how much work would there be in that, and does it make sense to try and delay the release for that? So in the last few days, I was looking at the DHCP-based workflow and trying to set up a test environment and put some stuff together. And it seems to me like there is potentially quite a bit of work involved in getting something that will work for our use case, because there is an existing DHCP L3 relay app, but it is designed to work on the fabric, and we need a little bit of changes to work on the OLT in a slightly different environment. For example, it would need to be changed to understand double VLAN tags. So the fabric doesn't use double VLAN tags, but the OLT does, right? All subscribers send DHCP messages using Q and Q VLANs. Other things are that we need some mechanism to send packets to the DHCP server, either by packeting out to the data plane or by sending in-band in the control plane. Oh, sorry, out of band in the control plane, and neither of those two mechanisms work right now. The OpenOLT on the edge core OLT doesn't support packet out on the interface that we need, and then there's no support for control plane DHCP relay. So there's a few features, and they seem to be, I don't have a clear idea, but it seems like it's probably a significant amount of work to, a few more weeks at least to get all of this stuff ready to a point where we have a full system that will be put together. And that's not including the XOS work. There needs to be more integration with XOS. So my feeling right now is that it probably doesn't make sense to hold the Cord release for this feature. I feel like it's something that could come in a later time, in a minor release, or going forward as we separate out the services from the service releases from the platform releases. Maybe we can release the services that need to be released with the updates that support this feature.
Yeah. So John, I appreciate your diving down into that. Is there I think you have a stubbed out something or another that we could say,
yes,
Upward Light with the following function stubbed out is what's available at 6.0.
Exactly, yes. So the current situation is that we can, like I said, we can do the ONU provisioning workflow with new ONU events coming out to XOS, and XOS being able to verify those ONUs and provision the VLANs on the OLT. And so it is possible to get a system that works in terms of it, you can make a ping go across the OLT and the fabric with the current setup, right? So it's not like things are broken. It's just that there's the second piece, which is the actual subscriber authentication workflow. So right now we don't have any authentication. We just sort of, by default allow all subscribers into the system.
Okay, so the 6.0 release of that particular profile would have that caveat that subscribers are not authenticated.
Yeah, so I think as now we support two workflow. One that is the bottom-up discovery on the ONU that has this glitch that is still missing authentication, so it will give traffic to every subscriber. And the other one is the top-down provisioning of the subscriber. That is what we did until 5.0. And that is still working, and it can still be used to have an external system to push down subscriber and activate them.
Well, okay.
Yeah,
so
and I think in 5.0 we also had no authentication, right? It wasn't like this is something that this is a feature that we're missing. It's kind of never been there. So
but if I could turn a bug into a feature, what you have now then is a kind of rendezvous of this top-down information that was pushed into the data model is sufficient to authenticate the user. Well, I use the word authenticate loosely. I mean, it is a variant of what we were after anyway. Or am I over?
So I think that is basically true, apart from the fact that the fabric has this issue where it is sort of automatically learning the subscriber termination piece and not waiting for it to be configured from XOS, right? So even though you configure the subscriber in XOS, the fabric probably has already allowed the traffic through. So potentially we could address that issue, and we have a proposal that would allow us to quickly address that issue so that we can turn off this automatic host learning feature in the fabric, and then we could just allow it to be provisioned by XOS. And then what you just said, I think, would be true, right? So we have this kind of top-down way of authenticating subscribers by provisioning them into XOS.
Okay, so, but it sounded like there was one little tiny dot.
Yeah, but that is a small piece that we could definitely do in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, I would argue let's do that.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, good. All right, well, man, we made it under the hour. I'm shocked. Other issues or comments on the release planning? Let's not talk about anything hard. Whisper, whisper. All right, let's declare victory and call this one and wrap this one up. And just a reminder, everyone, hopefully you saw the email. If you are not following closely and are surprised to hear about all the Kubernetes work, go read the guide under master. It's still a work in progress, and that's the main thing that needs to happen in the next week and a half. But strongly encourage anyone building Cord to start building it using what will be the 6.0 release.
On that, I strongly encourage everyone that looks at the guide and think that concepts are not clear to reach out to the mailing list asking for clarification and tell where the guide is confusing so that we can improve on it.
Yeah, thank you, Matteo. This is an opportunity for the community to complain about documentation when the development team is most focused on documentation. And so everyone would really appreciate getting those comments now, because everyone's in the business of trying to fix the documentation. All right, good enough. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Cheers.